My name is Elliot Roseman. I'm with ICF International. Thank you for coming here for our program on Smart Grid. We are delighted this morning to welcome three stellar speakers, whom I will introduce more fully in just a moment. This is the first time in the 8.5-year history of this breakfast series that we have actually had a program here at the Press Club. So you are here at the premiere. It is also the first time that we are videotaping one of these. So if the camera is on you, just smile. And lastly, some of you this may have passed by your cognizance, but today is actually the anniversary of the birthday of Johann Sebastian Bach. And why do I bring that up? It's because we have a wonderful symphony of speakers here this morning. I know, it was tortured. Sorry. And in specific, we have Chris Irwin from the U.S. Department of Energy, we have Ivo Steklak from C3 Energy, and we have Ogi Kovacevic from O-Power. And as I said, I'll introduce them in just a moment after a couple of quick administrative announcements. We do, as I mentioned, run these programs every month, and next month, our speaker, back at our usual location at 1725 I Street, will be Commissioner Ostendorf from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So a very different topic than we'll be addressing today. But if you're interested in topics relating to the nuclear fleet, to long-term waste storage, relicensing, small modular reactors, etc., please come. That will be on April 18th, Thursday, April the 18th, over, as I said, at 1725 I Street. And we'll be getting the literature and the brochures out on that, the flyers out soon. A number of ICF folks are here today, and so I won't actually go through and introduce them all, but mingle, don't be afraid to talk to ICF folks. We do have some new literature also over in the back, which I welcome you to pick up and take along with you relating to the topics we'll be talking about here today. In particular, a brochure on our regulatory and litigation work, which I recommend for your attention. So I'm going to introduce all three of our speakers now, all sort of one right after the other, so that you don't have to listen to me in between their remarks. And your responsibility is, of course, to be thinking about good questions and discussions that we can have after they have completed their comments. Our first speaker this morning will be Chris Irwin, who is the Smart Grid Standards and Interoperability Coordinator for the U.S. Department of Energy. He's in the Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability, otherwise known as OE. Chris has spent over 17 years in a diverse spectrum of high technology fields, from HVAC to semiconductor manufacturing, most recently in communications networks for advanced metering, AMI, and smart grid infrastructure. He's a member of the DOE's team administering the smart grid investment grants, and is responsible for standards and interoperability activities, including participation in the NIST-led Smart Grid Interoperability Framework. Prior to DOE, Chris served as Director of Products at an AMI communications vendor and participated in technology discovery and business development. He has a unique perspective on the U.S. energy business under transformation. Our second speaker this morning will be Ivo Steklak, the Chief Customer Officer from C3 Energy. Ivo has a broad background and experience in energy, and prior to joining C3 Energy, which was, I think you said 6 weeks ago or so, right? He has a fascinating background. He worked as COO of Tendril, CEO of Greenbox Technology, Global Vice President of Elster Integrated Solutions, co-founder and president of Inspiria Solutions, and president of the Energy and Utilities Division of Schlumberger. He will be talking about a lot of the perspective of the utilities and the customer analytics, maybe more of a top-down, but giving some case studies and examples from their experience. And then our third, but certainly not least speaker, Ogi Kovacevic, Vice President of Strategy and Marketing for O-Power. Ogi is a member of O-Power's executive management team and leads the company's product marketing and strategy groups. In this role, he's helped define O-Power's award-winning suite of products and solutions, which to date have delivered over 2 terawatt-hours of energy savings to utility customers. Prior to joining O-Power, Ogi was a management consultant at Katzenbach Partners, where he advised Fortune 500 clients on corporate strategy development with a particular focus on utility and smart grid sectors. He will take more of the bottom-up, more customer perspective, more retail, customer analytics. And so I'm delighted to welcome our three speakers here this morning. Please join me in welcoming Chris Irwin.
Thank you very much, Elliot. see if I can figure out. All right. I want to bring on my phone so I can sort of keep to our budget here. It's been a very, very exciting time. In the past 5 years, really, the stimulus kicked off an unprecedented investment in the smart grid, and it's been a very exciting time. It's been a challenge for our organization, as under the stimulus, our budget grew by a factor of 32 to turbocharge the smart grid deployments that are out there, and now we're moving through these projects with some very notable successes. But our challenge now is to move this forward as the stimulus exits the marketplace, and so that's sort of what I want to talk a little bit about today. I'm going to talk a little bit about our foundations and then move into what the topic of the breakfast is implementations and lessons, and finish a little bit with tools that we're working on. I think it's important that in this complex environment with a lot of complex solutions to the same problem, that we need to maintain a stable foundation so that we're always heading towards our goals and we know why we're doing it in the first place. So that's kind of why I put up here as our flowed down mission and our legislative basis for our program of why we have this mission and why we have these goals. From the DOE mission, it flows down into the Office of Electricity, focusing on energy reliability and energy delivery and grid modernization. Grid modernization was explicitly adopted as the official U.S. policy in ESA in 2007, and then funded dramatically under ARRA in 2009. So we are charged with accelerating grid modernization, and as we move through this, it's just been an exciting time, and we have a lot of lessons to share. So in pursuing that goal of accelerating grid modernization, we have 5 major tactics that we're working through. We're working to execute on the projects that we have. It's about 140 between the two, the Smart Grid Investment Grant and the Smart Grid Demonstration Program, and that does not include a couple of other programs I'll mention just after this. We want to evaluate the performance of these projects en masse and by technology going forward. We also want to encourage others to evaluate and see how much information we can make available to others, because it's a task that we simply cannot undertake all by ourselves. We need to engage key stakeholders, utilities, regulators, but then much deeper in is that there are multiple parties within utilities who need to have information placed into their hands so they can make the right decisions on modernization as it goes forward. Not just regulators, but regulatory staff and constituents themselves. So it's quite a challenge. We want to continue to advance the state-of-the-art in cybersecurity. We've made some really great progress. Cybersecurity was a foundational element in the project that we've been moving forward on. Nobody could move forward in a project without a clearly written cybersecurity plan. We made a strong effort on that to not be prescriptive in how you're going to implement it. We wanted the recipients to come up with their own approach to cybersecurity that was faithful to the principles of a solid implementation. And so there was a struggle in the beginning, but it's really come around, and we've held 2 annual cybersecurity information exchanges among the recipients, and it's been extremely well received. And from the smallest cooperative to some of the largest IOUs, they've all said that it's been a very high-quality process and has really upped their game, and we believe it'll create a population of mentors and ambassadors for making this a built-in foundational element in all projects going forward. Then, of course, we also want to look at the process of modernization not within our program, but also writ large, because, of course, with or without federal funding, we're charged with ensuring that modernization takes place. So just a quick breakdown on the stimulus, since this is our big tool here. $3.4 billion into the SGIG, another $620 into the demonstration program. Between those two, with the cost share, that's $9.5 billion going into grid modernization. It's a tremendous investment, and it's actually a relatively small investment compared to the challenge that we have. But we didn't stop there. Of course, workforce training. We needed to see how a modern grid can solve the global, the wide area network energy systems that we need to take care of, and also into interoperability standards, because these projects are very complex and they need to be simplified through better standards and more interoperability. Obviously, our investments put a strain on the state regulatory environments, and so we also had assistance going to them as well. So into the implementation, since 2009, we've gone through the selection process, the completion of the project plans, which of course had the project scope itself, how they're going to measure the projects through a metrics and benefits approach, and then how they're going to secure these projects as they're built. At this point, we are well into the implementation and the build-out of the projects, and we expect the bulk of the projects to be complete inside the investment grant program by the end of this year. The smart grid demonstration projects are, in some respects, more aggressive with the same technologies, and they have a slightly longer implementation period. But nonetheless, even after the implementation is done, we intend to measure and watch these projects to extract as many lessons learned as possible as we go through this. To date, that date being December 2012, because we don't want to get too quick on our feet, we've spent about $3 billion of the $4.5 billion in this program. That, of course, has a 50% match, so that means about $6 billion in modernization has gone into the ground in the United States. By the mid-2014, the rest of the money will be spent for the most part as it goes sort of asymptotically to $3.5 billion. The other thing that's going to be very interesting about this year and sort of instrumental in the lessons learned and really having to up our game on the information sharing is that 45 projects will be completing this year. They will complete their build out, and so it's really a stellar opportunity for us and for the industry in general to take a step there and take a look at how we're doing. I think just at the end of next month, Florida Power and Light, which is one of my grants, will be completing the build-out of its $578 million project. And so the amount of deployment that's gone on is kind of staggering, no matter what scale you look at. But we have a lot of projects that are hitting their stride and a lot of projects that are coming to conclusion. And so lots of opportunities for us and for everybody else to learn from. Going down into a little bit of the things, we love to count things, especially when it ends in millions. But we have a lot of advanced metering infrastructure that's going in. That's been an evolving business case and a very interesting one to watch. Everybody, they started on that road, 2 decades ago for operational efficiencies. But if you look at the news from the last couple of months, it's actually the front end of the grid that's actually been leading the charge on resiliency and reliability. When Hurricane Sandy came through, Pepco in this area had their advanced meters out, and those meters were telling the utility exactly where the problems were, exactly where the outages were occurring, and they had some very positive things to say how it sped the restoration efforts, how it allowed them to target crews more accurately to their areas. So it's not just a tool for the consumer and the relationship with the consumer and operational benefits. It has true benefits on reliability and upstream improvements in efficiency in the distribution system. Of course, you see the switches. That's going to be highlighted in a couple of projects here, but essentially allowing the distribution system on the poles and wires in your neighborhoods to actually reconfigure themselves to heal around problems and things like that. Really allows a system to adapt within seconds to situations rather than every time a truck has to go out and do things. And then up at the very large picture is synchrophasers and the ability to essentially go from taking the pulse of the grid to performing an MRI on the grid. That's the closest analogy I have. But we're measuring the frequency and a lot of characteristics at the very top trunking level of the grid 30 times a second as opposed to once every 4 seconds. So it really is a dramatic improvement. We can see disturbances propagate, and that's kind of why our office was created in the first place. It was the blackout in the Northeast that triggered that, and we believe the synchrophaser technology going in allows us to see that and tackle that and arrest it before it propagates. So into the lessons learned and the leading, a couple of examples of who is advancing the ball in various areas in the smart grid. Among customer systems, Oklahoma Gas and Electric has really moved forward in terms of time of use and dynamic pricing to address peak energy problems, where they are basically, during the hottest parts of the day in the summer, they're using more energy than their system is comfortable using. So one of the tools to address that is through electricity rates and allow customers to see when there are strains on the grid through pricing programs. They were able to offset their peak energy use by 30% with just a pricing program. And in general, that is a revenue-neutral proposition, and so this is not a pain point for consumers for the most part, but actually a constructive way to participate together in solving some of the issues of the grid. Over on the distribution side, we have Chattanooga, the city of Chattanooga, which is a fascinating example of smart grid technology in a progressive environment. They're putting in the automated circuit feeders that allow them to dynamically reroute power around problems. And they've actually seen a 40% reduction in customer minutes. When they had a tornado come through their area 2 summers ago, there were 60,000 people who did not lose power because as soon as a line broke, it rerouted the power around it. And that's just a dramatic success story. And it's actually, Chattanooga has another really great point, is that they are building energy reliability into their Chamber of Commerce pitch to recruit organizations and businesses to come to their area. And it's really the only place in the country I've seen this. But the Chamber of Commerce promotes the reliability of their electric system and allows them to bring in some top-tier businesses to their area to move their city forward. And it's really a great transformation story. Talquin Electric, mysteriously another one of my grants, they're out in the panhandle of Florida. They're saving $200,000 a year from being able to read these meters remotely. But I think the more interesting story about Talquin is that before they started this project, the customers had to go out to the meter, walk around the house, go out to the meter, read their own meter, write the reading down, and mail it in, or come to an easy drive-by window. So they have really made a quantum leap compared to what technology they had there. And they've handled the transition from an organizational and a management standpoint as elegantly as they have the technology. In the transmission level, the Western Electricity Coordinating Council, it's easy to say WEC, they are installing an enormous number of phaser measurement units to provide that wide area visibility. And because the Western region has a tremendous amount of renewable energy, both wind and hydro, they have a particular need to see how they can increase the flexibility of the grid as the variability of some of these supply sources come online. And so they're sort of leading the way in looking at how they can see the grid and instantly adapt to it. I'm going to try and go back to my timer to make sure I don't blow this. Trying to report out on the information that we've produced so far. We have a lot of analytical efforts going on, and again, as I said, we need to have other folks working on it as well. But we have a host of contractors, including ICF here, helping us try to analyze some of the information, helping us extract those lessons learned. We also have produced a series of impact reports taking a look at different areas of the grid, and they were released just at the beginning of this year. We also produced a 2012 progress report that's worth reading if you ride the Metro. In addition to what we're trying to extract in terms of lessons learned in our reporting and analysis, we're also working to provide new tools to the industry to frame the benefits, to actually speak the benefits in an objective manner to their oversight, whether it's a local electric cooperative board, a municipal city council, or a regulatory agency. One of the tools that we've created is the ICE calculator, the interruption cost calculator, which has no correspondence to the acronym that I can tell. However, the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab helped us create this tool that takes interruptions in electricity service and turns it into a dollar benefit for reliability. As dry as this is, we've actually seen a number of organizations pick this up. An investor-owned utility actually put this as a basis for valuing the benefits of their technology into a regulatory proceeding. So it sort of counts as the credibility of the tool itself. I've seen a couple of vendors who use this to show how their advanced self-healing switching technology has a dollar benefit to the constituents who are receiving the services under it. So really looking to put tools in people's hands. In an effort to set the stage for my other speakers here, we, of course, have had a very high-profile effort on getting consumers access to their own energy information. We've seen over the past few years, utilities have really upped their game. They're looking to deliver a lot more value on the energy services that they provide to their customers. And I think both C3 and O-Power are excellent examples of how utilities are partnering with companies to deliver value on that solution. But additionally, we think it's essential that customers gain access to that information essentially independent of the relationship with the utility itself, is that they have a right to receive that information and use it as they see fit. And we think it only raises the tide of all boats out there. So that is the Green Button Initiative. The White House has been a genuine champion for this. It fits into their open data initiatives rather well. And the electricity industry has responded resoundingly. Basically, there are now 16 million customers in the United States who have access to their information in a standard format. That creates a perfect environment for independent developers to use this information to help customers however they want. If they're environmental, if they're cost conscious, if they just want to use it in one application, turn your energy consumption data into a simulated fight with Mike Tyson. It's not something a utility would do, but damn it, somebody wanted to do it. So that's one of the reasons we're doing it. We held a contest last year, is that now we're making this information available. Who wants to develop an application for this? We did this with some trepidation, but in partnership with Itron and Pacific Gas and Electric, we launched an Apps for Energy contest last year. The response was fantastic. We got 57 applications submitted. Some of them were very good. Some of them have gone on to commercial success. And these people had 5 weeks to develop applications that use any form of green button data, whether it's for commercial and industrial or business or for consumers. And it really has been a great success. I wanted to put the $10 billion into context, and it really is a drop in the bucket, is that we have a tremendous number of successes. The projects that we're putting out there are leading edge, global leaders in the technology areas that they're being produced in. But nonetheless, is that it's a drop in the bucket compared to the modernization that needs to take place for us to have a resilient, customer empowering, reliable grid. And so it's it's our responsibility to catalyze follow-on investments, rather be content with the success of our own projects. And so that's our challenge going forward. I'd like to thank you very much. I'm looking forward to hearing from our other speakers. We have a couple of resources to find, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for your time this morning, for allowing us to speak, and thank you to ICF International for the opportunity to address you. So I'm going to talk to you about C3 Energy and what we are and what we do. And as Elliot introduced me, I've been with the company for 6 weeks, so you may have to indulge me a little bit in figuring out whether I've actually learned what the company does in its full extent. But we talk about ourselves as a smart grid analytics company. And for that, let's talk a little bit about the smart grid. Chris has done a great job of showing us all of the different investments that are going into it. But the grid, particularly the electric grid, is one of the biggest and most complex machines ever built by man. And it's not done, right? There is over $1 trillion of investment in the smart grid in the US alone in the next coming years, modernizing this infrastructure. And most of the modernization comes from the advent of computing, microelectronics, and communications. So what's happening is we are instrumenting this grid and enabling us to monitor and pull information out of that grid in real time when it's necessary, in somewhat less than real time when it's not necessary, in order to make that grid more reliable, more resilient, more secure, which gets debated quite often with all the information that the grid is giving off, and more adaptable to the things that we now want to put on it, such as renewable and distributed generation that now goes at any place in the grid where there is new load or new capacity shortages, rather than at the head end of it the way that it was built originally. Let's talk a little bit about some of the data issues of this. So the most often cited example is smart metering. So smart meters produce nearly 3,000 times as much information if they deliver 15-minute data versus once a month that utilities typically went and read those electric meters, or people walked around the side of their house, tried to decipher what the meter said, and wrote it on a bingo card and sent it in. So that's a 3,000-fold increase. If you then add the actual additional information that those meters provide in terms of monitoring the health of the load, the customer, and the grid feeding up to that, it can easily extend to 10,000 times that amount. And this is simply one example. If we then move further up the grid and at each point, at each major asset, at each major juncture of that machine, put additional measurement, you can see that this creates a massive deluge of data and information that's now streaming into the utilities. And that's not the only information, because we're also now bringing consumers into the picture and trying to make sure that consumers understand what they consume, why, and what they might be able to do about it. And a myriad of information is flowing back from consumers about their behavior in relation to the information that they're being given through Green Button or through other facilities. And so our company is attempting to make sense of all of that. And what I'll talk to you about is one particular example, chosen specifically because both C3 Energy and Opower are actually involved in trying to make this one of the most modern utilities in the country, and that is Pacific Gas and Electric. You're not going to be able to see this. This is one of those wonderful eye charts where I think the author decided to try to use every pixel available. But fundamentally, what it tries to show is the complexity of that grid. And we've got that nice, simple picture of what the grid looks like, but underneath it, all of the existing incident systems that utilities use today. And one of the things that needs to be pointed out is that within these systems, there is little integration and little understanding of how data can be pulled out and correlated across all of those. And I'll try to explain how we're trying to do that. So, starting with customer analytics, because in fact, one of the first things that we have found as information is starting to flow in is how do we give it to consumers so that consumers can now be an active and dynamic part of this grid in understanding how they can work with it. So the PG&E example. PG&E came to C3, sorry, I'll go back one, in the spring of last year and basically said, we have a problem. We've deployed a great customer engagement and analytics capability with my esteemed colleague Opower, but we don't have something like this for our biggest energy consumers, the 2,000 largest loads that they have that represent something close to 70% of the energy consumed, nor do we really have a solution for all of the people sort of below that in the small and medium business enterprises that represent about another 450,000 customers. And we need something because we've got all this smart metering data. As we all know, PG&E got some bad press about having smart metering data and not enabling their customers to be able to utilize it. And so they needed to go into the process. Small problem. While PG&E knew who those customers were and knew all their historical billing information and where they were, that was about all they knew about them. They didn't know necessarily what business those customers were in, the size of their facilities, the amount of their workforce, why they consumed the amount of energy that they did. And so this became the first piece of the extended data problem. At C3, we basically looked out and found a number of disparate databases and data sources that enabled us to begin to intelligently provide those customers information about that consumption and what they might be able to do about it. We started with, obviously, the data that PG&E could give us, which was 3 out of 19 total databases that we integrated. Those databases gave us the 15-minute and hourly AMI information, and obviously all of the historical bills and the customer location and address and account numbers and so on and so forth. That allowed us to reach out to those customers. We then also ingested the 21,000 different energy conservation measures that have been approved and credited in the state of California. We then went out and ingested information from 2 other benchmarking sources, one a Californian source called SUSE and a national standard called CBEX that's put out by the EIA. And this enabled us to now to know what other buildings and other premises and facilities and businesses of a similar type nationally consumed in terms of energy. And that's important because one of the first things that we all learn is that if you get compared to somebody else, as we all sort of do behaviorally day to day, then that becomes one of the primary motivations and impetuses to do something about it, particularly if you don't compare very well. Right? I think any one of us who have spouses in the room knows exactly what I'm talking about from a behavioral analytic standpoint. We also ingested information from Energy Star, from Leads, from a number of different sources that were simply real estate or financial records that enabled us to begin to build a highly correlated picture of what that facility and business did. So, long story short, all of these pieces of information were pulled together. Now, this is less than 500,000 total customers. The resulting system has 28 billion records in a database. It receives information at 500 million records an hour in a constant steady state basis. So when people talk about big data, an unfortunately overblown and overhyped term, it is real. Right? To actually provide this kind of measurable, actionable information to customers and then back to the utility feeding those customers about how they can be better at providing energy to them, it truly is a big data and a big analytics problem. And reducing this into information in real time is actually quite an issue. So what do these folks get? So we stratified them into two types of layers. This sort of enterprise layer, customers that had multiple facilities and multiple businesses within PG&E service territory get a relatively complex and piece of software that enables them to understand what all those facilities consume. And I apologize, these are somewhat eye charts. But for instance, what's important about them is what is the consumption year over year, and what is that consumption in terms of KPIs or key measurements that are important to the business. While those of us in this space understand what kilowatt hours and kilowatts may mean, a good number of people don't, and in fact don't really care. What they want to know is how much do I spend and how much do I spend per something that's important and relevant to me. If I'm in the hospitality industry, that's probably per number of hotel rooms or beds served. If I'm in the retail industry, it might be based on shelf space or the amount of product I'm moving out of it. And so it's important for us to have pulled all of that information in so that we can render that measurement in a term that's relevant and important to that business and to the people managing that business. And so they can analyze against 85 different sets of KPIs that in each of the different business segments that we've identified. They can also, most importantly, then look at all their facilities in a Pareto analysis of best performing to worst performing. And these are normalized against the same KPIs and normalized against weather. So if you've got, and it's an amazing database. I've looked at, for instance, Starbucks in the entire PG&E service territory. First of all, there's an incredible number of them. like there seems to be around DC, walking around this morning a little bit. Secondly, if you normalize their consumption in basically energy intensity, let's say simply per square foot of real estate of a Starbucks, it's a little difficult to figure out how many lattes they serve on a daily basis. But, and then normalize it for weather conditions across all the different microclimates in PG&E service territory, you still get a massive spread, literally a 10-to-1 difference between best and worst performing in how many kilowatt hours per square foot they consume. And the question is why? How can that be so vastly different? And so what's important is, one, alerting them to the fact that they do have such outliers, and then two, looking at the 21,000 accredited, approved energy conservation measures and identifying the right ones for each and every single one of those locations, and most specifically to the locations that are the worst performing, so that they're given actionable recommendations, the plan for how to execute them, the return on investment, if any investment is necessary, if they have to put in some additional equipment or capabilities, and then can monitor that plan. And so that's fundamentally what we try to provide those high-end customers. In the small and medium business side, it needed to be a little bit simpler, right? We're now not talking about somebody who manages multiple facilities and potentially even has an energy management or financial kind of accounting in that place. We're talking about your local dry cleaner, the corner pizza shop, the small mom and pops. And so you need to present that information in a much simpler way. And here, I'll run very quickly through the type of information we present. We let them see exactly how much they consume in their electricity and their gas. Importantly, we show them what the environmental impacts of all of this kind of consumption is, because we found that those are still strong motivators in terms of that information. And again, comparables within their type of business. SIC code as a simpler one, but they can actually choose even better comparisons. And a similar guide to, here's how much money you could save on the amount of energy spend that you have if you actually perform all the energy conservation measures that we recommend to you based on what we know about your business. And you can look at year-over-year consumption. You can look at it you can look at it against temperature and weather and against other facilities. And most importantly, you can also get a disaggregation of your consumption, effectively a virtual audit on the facility that tells you, here is how we believe that consumption is broken down. So in this, I think the example up here is a restaurant. In a restaurant, a lot of it is going to be refrigeration and cooking, right? But then once you pull that out, where else are you spending money, and how else might you be able to target that in an ongoing basis? So PG&E came to us in the spring of last year. We went live with the system. We soft launched it in October of last year. Our success criteria with PG&E were how many people actually adopted an energy conservation measure and also looked at the information about their facilities and made some corrections even against the data that we were able to find and pull together. In October, in the first month that we released these two new products to the PG&E population, we performed more customers chose energy conservation measures and performed auditing than they had in the entirety of the previous last year. In November, we hit a 5x of the previous last year. And by the end of January of this year, we had already blown through PG&E's objectives in terms of what they wanted to achieve in 2013. So what we're seeing is that information presented accurately, relevantly to consumers has a tremendous impact and engages them and has them actually participate. And so to date, PG&E is over the moon in terms of how their customers are beginning to now help them. But what's important is, how do we also now take this information and bring it further up the grid to make PG&E and other utilities like them even more efficient in what they do? And so I'll talk about grid analytics. Moving that same information further up into the distribution, transmission, and then generation elements of the grid is just as important as making customers that efficient as we've just talked about. And so we're in the process of developing a number of analytics applications that do just that. The first two, revenue protection and outage prediction and restoration, are actually live, and then we're building the rest of the ones that I've got listed here through the rest of this year. And I'm going to talk just briefly about some of those. Revenue protection, we still have in this country effectively reported about 1 to 1.5% revenue loss due to what's called non-technical issues in utilities. And that basically equates usually to equipment malfunction, but mostly to theft. And you can imagine that now that we have information about all these facilities that consume energy, and we understand not just the energy that they consume, but we understand why they consume the energy that they do, because we have now benchmarking information. We now know about the size and shape and constitution of each of those different facilities. We can also assess whether they are consuming what we think is a rational amount of energy for that premise. So in that same sort of Pareto analysis where you have a 10x delta between worst and best performing, there's a little bit more scrutiny now on the best performing. Why are they so good? Is it possible that perhaps the measurement is not correct, or is it possible that perhaps that facility might be doing something untoward? And so some of that same intelligence is now being applied to helping the utility find where they are losing revenue. And effectively, that revenue is always paid for by ratepayers and distributed across those of us who do pay our bills. So it benefits everybody in the long run. And it's just as important to use information that the utility has and correlate it with information outside. Next application, outage prediction and restoration. Outages still cost this nation billions of dollars a year, right? And as we know, they fund huge departments within the federal government when they're really, really big. Not a bad thing. But what's important is not just information about the behavior and performance of the grid, but other information that can be brought to bear as well. And so having a capability to be able to assess huge amounts of information, one of the things that we're doing here is assessing extremely fine-grained weather information and forecast information, as well as topological photography that gives us information about vegetation and allows us to predict where in intense overhead electric systems we are going to likely have problems due to incoming storms and vegetation growth. Again, all the information is there, right? We can go to Google Earth or Google Maps or to a number of the geospatial information companies and obtain extremely detailed information about the planet that we live on, correlate that to also extremely detailed forecast information down to less than a square kilometer in this country from NOAA and other sources, and then ingest historical information from the utility about the performance and behavior of their distribution grids, correlate all of that information, and begin to provide predictive information, predictive analysis that says where might the next big problem occur. Where might it occur because of the age and condition of the assets on the grid? Where might it occur because of the exposure of different aspects of the grid to vegetation or to potential storm effects? And where might it have the biggest impact because of where your key and most important relevant customers are? And this allows the utilities to better plan for potential future storms, to better site and stage equipment in the fields, because of course their service territories are hundreds of thousands of square miles, and going out and fixing something, sometimes half the problem is getting there and getting the right equipment into position, so that they can be better at providing that kind of restoration and even further improve the service. So I won't belabor the other examples because they start getting really technical, and I'm not sure anybody really wants to go into the geek speak as much. So that's C3. Our job is basically to find, integrate, aggregate, federate, and correlate massive amounts of information, and from that, bring decision, support, and intelligence to the utility industry, starting with their customers and moving further up the grid. Thank you.
I just preview my whole presentation. Damn it. Thanks. Any questions? So I want to talk a little bit more about what's in it for us. So when I say for us, I don't mean sort of the energy professionals in the room, but us as the end consumers. I think I'm guessing everybody here is an electricity customer, unless you're living off the grid somewhere. If there are any of those people, I'd love to talk to you. So let me try to make this a little bit interactive. Quick question for everybody here: how many people have checked their email today? Okay. How about in the last hour? How about since I started talking? Okay. Well, that's so how about your financial statement this week? Most people, right? In the last couple of days. Okay. How about your energy use? Oh wow, we got a couple energy geeks in the room. I gave a similar talk in front of 300 utility employees about 2 weeks ago, and I've sort of opened up sort of with the same set of questions. It was 300 utility employees I asked about checking your energy use, and literally nobody raised their hand. And their CEO was there, and the entire management team was just sort of really an awkward situation. So hopefully not as awkward, but it's not uncommon. There was a recent Accenture study that was published. I quote this a lot. They somehow found that people spend about 9 minutes a year thinking about energy consumption. I have no idea how they came up with this stat, but it rings true, so I use it a lot and I quote it. But it's their study. You can ask them about it. So what you guys are not that different from everybody else. Neither am I, and I work in this industry. So why is this a problem? That's the question. So what, right? We don't check our energy usage. Maybe we don't need to. So it's not so much a problem as it is a missed opportunity. Let me show you something that I'm calling the energy information equation. But we've found empirically through a lot of our programs, I'll tell you a little bit about them in a minute, that for every dollar a utility spends providing people better information about their usage, people find a way to save about 3. Okay? It's about a 200% ROI. It's pretty good in today's economy. And the reason this equation is important is because utilities are the ones that are typically providing the energy information to their customers. And the funds that they use to get you this new infrastructure, some of the stuff that you've seen from MEVO, and I'll show you some of our stuff in a minute, it's all paid by us. It's all paid by the ratepayers at the end of the day. And so we want to make sure that the dollars that we're using is actually benefit. And this is a pretty good benefit. And if you compare energy information to other energy efficiency measures, and this is sort of a similar dynamic, energy information is an incredible way to drive energy efficiency. And this is just a quick graph that shows you for every 100,000 homes that are targeted with some of these traditional utility programs, CFL lighting is sort of the dominant way, the dominant spend for utilities on energy efficiency. But home audits, weatherization, e-stuff, these are all great programs. Energy information, because of its scalability, right, can have an impact that is, compared to most, an order of magnitude bigger. And it's also very cost effective, okay? So this is very compelling. We can do this. So the question is, what's the problem? Why don't we all have better energy information, and why don't we all save money? The problem is, as we saw, the energy data is boring. Right, and that's why it's one of the reasons nobody here really has checked it recently. It's boring, and utilities to date have not really found a terribly compelling way to present it back to us. This is a typical bill. I have no idea what it says, and I've been in this industry for a while. I still can't figure out all the stuff that's on it. And so, and part of the reason to utilities' credit is that there isn't that much interesting information to convey. You get about 1 meter read a year, and it is what it is, and there's only so much you can do with it, right? So then comes the smart meter. This is what the topic of the day is, and EVO, and I think the smart meters can really help out here. So Ivo touched on this. I'll repeat it again. But the thing about the smart meter is if you go from 1 meter read a month to about 4 an hour, it's about a 3,000 increase in data. So there's quite a bit of new data coming up, and it presents potentially a lot of opportunity for us to do with it, and it presents a big opportunity for us to take that data and provide it back to the consumer in a useful way. But smart meters, I want to make this point, smart meters in and of themselves are not enough. And I think a lot of utilities have made this mistake, and now they've corrected it since, but some of their early deployments, they would just put the smart meters, and in fact, I know utilities who have put smart meters in place and then attempted to sort of measure energy savings by the customers, and I would ask them, well, so what did you do with the smart meter? And they were, no, we just installed it. And so, and I still, to this day, I talk to utilities, and I get this answer, which is really perplexing. But this is what happens when you just install a smart meter. This is, I think, was done by the Smart Grid Consumer Collaborative. I haven't added up the percentages, but the vast majority of the consumers, when asked about smart meters, don't even know what it is. Right? Have no idea what it is. But it's actually even worse than that. And this is a little more tragic and somewhat comical as well. But literally, if you go to Google right now and type in pitchfork wielding mobs, the first hit will be a smart meter article. That's true. So you can try it. You can try it yourself. Unfortunately, this is what happened at PG&E. But this is more, I think our PG&E is a client, and hopefully will forgive me for pointing it out, and they don't really like it that much. But it's been a few years since this has been the case, and they're doing a lot. But it's really a good example of what happens when you just install the smart meter and don't take the measures to provide new value to the customer. Okay, so how do we fix this? The keys in what Ivo was touching on, which is analytics. The key is to take all this data and convert it into value that the end consumer can use. In fact, I think the more, I speak at conferences a lot, and one of the things I always try to point out to utilities is the more data you have, the less data you have to present back to the consumer, and the more insights you can actually, just insights and the so whats you can compare to the consumer. So let me show you what that looks like. This is an example of a home energy report. It's essentially a better bill. And this is going live. We have this in 10 million homes across the U.S. As just an example module of an analytics, this is something that's possible with smart meters. No instruments in the home, just a smart meter behind the home, and good analytics will show this consumer, if you can't tell here, but this consumer, there's an average comparison in sort of the first module, and they're about average. They're right in the middle. Their overall consumption is about average. But their heating usage is 37% higher than average. This is a new insight. This person absolutely had no idea. They got a normal bill. They asked their friends. Their bill is about the same. They had no idea the heating component of their usage is so off the charts, and that usually means that something is wrong. And so, we paired that with targeted tips for them, depending on the age of their house or whatever, and their income levels and so forth, and they can try to do something about it. So that's one example. What you do with that, a lot of utilities, of course, go online and present the same information and upgrade the utility websites to something that looks more modern. So there's a lot of utilities across the country now doing that. And there, of course, if you're going to go online, you have to have social features, right? So one of the trends, there are about 20 utilities across the country piloting this, but trying to marry the smart meter data with social graphs and trying to find yet another way to help you engage and compare your energy usage with your friends. This is another example that's being driven in competitive markets in particular, where they're focused on retaining and keeping their customers happy. But these are weekly emails that you can subscribe to from your utility that tells you how you're doing, how your energy usage is, how you're doing with your energy usage throughout the month. And in particular, bill forecasting and usage alerts, I think, is one of the killer apps. It's a very simple app, but it's one of the killer apps of the smart grid, which is forecasting your bill before it's too late, right? I mean, a home energy report that tells you, listen, you use 37% more at the end of the month, is interesting, but I wish you would have told me, 2 weeks in, so I can do something about it. So imagine an alert that says, listen, you're headed for a $175 bill, which is twice as much as I usually do. Maybe you want to do something about it. And then interestingly, pairing that information with potentially a rebate or an offer that utility may have already available. So, this utility may have a $100 rebate on a programmable thermostat. When you pair it in this specific situation, right, this customer is a high heating usage, this programmable thermostat can really help you. It's obviously an HVAC issue. The yield on all those types of marketing is 2 to 3 times higher than sort of regular marketing. And talking about thermostat, this is sort of my favorite, going beyond information to just control. This is an iPhone app controlling a thermostat that has a Wi-Fi chip in it. And we're seeing 5 to 8 times a week that people are using this application. We're sort of partnering with Honeywell to do it. The app stores are off the chart. So this is probably about 9 to 10 minutes a week that people are spending, mostly, I think, messing with the thermostats from their bed or from the couch, or sort of messing. I hear stories about people changing it from work and sort of freaking out their spouse who's still at home and so forth. In any case, customer engagement is through the charts. It's the opposite of where we started. And so these are all sort of visuals, and I think what I want to stress is this is not theoretical. It's not an academic exercise. These are not prototypes. Every single thing that you've seen on the sort of the previous 5 slides is live somewhere around the country. In fact, this is a quick snapshot of the utilities that we're working with, including 5 countries beyond the US. And each one of them has one or all of these things starting to roll out. Now, I should point out, not every single one of the utilities has a fully deployed smart grid, but they're on their way. And it's really heartening to see. I think a lot of these types of features are coming our way very soon. And then finally, the results. I started with the energy equation. This is not just about having a cool experience with your utility. I think there's sort of a limited appetite how much all of us will interact with our utility, but it's really, the equation is really paying off. So far, all of these products together have driven 2.3 terawatt hours in verified measurable energy savings to date. So I know we're sort of energy professionals in this room mostly, but 2.3 terawatt hours is about 250,000 homes for a year. That's the city of size of DC, essentially off the grid. And we're sort of a small 300-person software company in Arlington, which is essentially DC. I think we can declare DC carbon neutral, because we're driving energy savings equivalent to what DC is spending, and I think we're just getting started. We're about 10% of the homes in the U.S. Take this by 10, take it to the gas homes as well. We estimate about $4 or $5 billion a year is going to be saved by providing people better energy information. We would like to see encouragement from the government, for everybody else, to utilities to not just deploy the infrastructure, but to actually encourage them to engage their customers and provide the information. The Green Button Initiative is a great example of that. We'd like to see more of that happening. Thanks. I'll leave you with that thought. We can talk more.
Well, it's a shame that we weren't able to hear more detail and more great information. You guys didn't really obviously have very much to say about Smart Grid. It's now your turn. Please let me know what questions you have. Who's got the first question for our Jenny? Please wait for the mic, and if you would introduce yourself when you ask your question. Thanks.
Jenny Howe, Sun Energy Capital. My question actually to O-Power is the one that how much resistance actually you get from the utility, because you're saving the money for customer, but what is the incentive for utility to go actually support you, to actually send you all of the data, help customer, and then lose their business?
So, is this on? Can you guys hear me? Yeah. So I get this question all the time. In fact, our investors, when they were looking to invest in the business, said, how does this business work? Why would the utility want to invest in lower energy savings? I think the answer is, it's actually incredibly important question, because at the end of the day, if it's not in the interest of the utility, this doesn't happen. And it's good to point out, I just want to clarify that everything that you've seen today is very much in partnership with the utility. We don't go direct to the consumer. In fact, companies who have tried to go direct to the consumer have failed, Microsoft, Google, and it's just the relationship that exists between the utility and customers is the one you want to take advantage of, and it's really where this works. So when it comes to energy savings, most utilities, about 22 states right now, have energy efficiency mandates they're trying to meet. And energy information becomes an incredibly cost-effective way to reach those goals in a way that also improves customer satisfaction and leads to other benefits. My favorite example of this happening is in the competitive markets, where utility lives and dies by every dollar they make of every kilowatt hours. And they're still deciding to do it. And they're still deciding to implement programs that they know will reduce consumption anywhere between 1% and 3%, which is a significant hit to their revenue. But what happens is the customers who are receiving this information appreciate it so much that they become more loyal to their utility. The math really works out. And so this sort of energy efficient customer is a happy customer hypothesis is really working out. And I think it works both in regulated and deregulated markets.
Let's keep moving. Yes, sir. Please, if you would introduce yourself.
Morning. My name is Ryan Shelby. I'm a Science Technology Policy Fellow at Millennium Challenge Corporation. So this question is really about improving grid flexibility to incorporate microgrids that use a lot of intermittent sources like renewable energy. Could you guys comment on if you know of any best practices or case studies that provide lessons learned on incorporating these intermittent power sources into the grid?
Chris?
I'll start. And so, there's actually two topics inside of that. One is distributed energy resources, which is sort of the global term that we use for whether it's a diesel generator or solar panels and things like that, is that they are sources of variability in the grid. But in microgrids, there is a lot of research gone on. In my division, there's been a long-term program in microgrids, but there's also a partnership between the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense in a program called SPIDERS that really sort of looks to maximize the benefits of resiliency. And of course, the military has the highest interest in resiliency that's out there. But they're exploring the microgrid concept in a way that is exportable to any business model that's out there. There's other research underway, but I think that the DOE microgrid program and the DOD SPIDERS joint program are probably the best sources of information that I personally know of.
I was going to say, there are a number of utilities are doing microgrid piloting. Typically, they'll end up doing it around university and research campuses. So, for instance, I know San Diego Gas and Electric has one at UC Davis, where they're learning about basically being able to take an element of the grid and partition it to go off grid when it's in its favor or in the best operating conditions of the grid in totality, as well as that small piece of it. And what we've all talked about is all extremely relevant, because what we're talking about is being able to have the kind of flexibility that we sort of all enjoy and understand in how we check our email, right? The internet is a spectacular example of something that is unbelievably fault tolerant, resilient, and dynamic, and can repurpose itself as it needs to deliver all of our wonderful emails that some of us don't read.
Where there's electricity.
Where there's electricity, yes. Where there's efficient electricity and efficient customers.
Great. Let me, okay, please.
Is it on? Yeah. I'm Marcia Johnson. I work for Renewable Energy World, among others. At the last Smart Grid conference, so sort of been last year, there was just some talk rumbling a little bit about the idea of whether there was enough benefit in smart grid information per customer, I think, sort of talk about 5-10% savings or something like that, to motivate. From what I'm hearing here, it sounds like these tools are providing that motivation. Would you guys say that there is an evolution? Has there been an evolution in the
Yeah.
in the
So
market?
the one I can start. I think the one thing I didn't talk about today that I often talk about, we often talk about OPower, is the sort of behavioral science aspect of it all, and this is exactly right. Information alone, and the messages around saving money in particular are actually are not enough. And you know, for a lot, depending on the size of your home and so forth, it's not that much money. It's not such a, you know, it's $30, $50, $40 a year. It's not insignificant, but you know, even for the lower income segments, it's not enough to significantly change it. So there's an art and a science to how you present this information, and you saw in a lot of the slides. Peer comparison, neighbor comparison, that's what's known as normative messaging in behavioral science, very powerful way to motivate. There are other principles in behavioral science like injunctive messaging, lost language, a lot of things you can use to actually get customers to pay attention. And I think the behavioral science, the advent of behavioral science has really changed the equation on that.
Is the social stuff helping with that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the social features are essential. What we've done with one of the stats we've seen with our home energy reports is that people take them. They're printed and they're mailed. And the reason we do it is because it's still the predominant way through which customers interact with their utility. If you get an envelope from a utility that looks like a bill, you will open it. The open rates are like in the 90%. So it's an incredible way to engage customers. And when they open it up, instead of that sort of a convoluted bill, they see this shiny home energy report that tells them they use more than their neighbors. They pay attention, and about 60% of the people actually take the report and show it around the house to their kids or to their spouse, and you know, I'm sure fights ensue and so forth. But they also show it to their neighbors, and the social thing is essentially so that is actually social happening through a sort of a lower tech channel, but what we're trying to do is take that same phenomenon and make it easier to sort of brag about or share the information.
So let me ask you about the flip side of that. People get that report and they say, the utility knows all that about me? The privacy concern, right? I mean, I'm sure you all have had to address that. Could you all maybe talk about that information or that concern? I mean, the guy with the pitchfork might have been concerned about
so
that.
there's a little bit of that, and I'll let others jump in as well. There's a little bit of that because of the novelty of it. But if you think about it, when we get something from our phone company or for a credit card company, what my phone and my credit card company knows about me, it's sort of scary, right? I mean, where you spend every single dollar basically on your credit card and who you've called and so forth. And yet consumers are extremely comfortable with that, right? You get your bill from AT&T, nobody bats an eye at it, and like, oh my God, AT&T knows everything about my life. And so it's really, you know, a lot is made about it, but at the end of the day, consumers are very comfortable, and they already know that utility knows it's coming from the utility. It's not from a third party. I think that's the key. That's why it's one of the reasons I think third parties also have failed to do this. But it's under the premise of the utility and their logo and their regulatory structures and encapsulate us, it's really a non-issue.
So Ivo, I know you want to jump in, and also if you could address what are the utilities doing to make sure that that data is not compromised or.
Sure. So I'll echo exactly what Ogi said. If you can show customers that the information is highly personal and highly relevant, they'll tend to turn over in their minds that this is actually very useful to me, and not worry so much about the fact that there might be comparisons. Plus, the comparisons don't say it's my neighbor Ogi who lives 3 houses down the street. It says it's similar homes or similar businesses within this sort of area, right? So it's not attributable to that extent. However, what's really interesting, though, if you give customers, and we find this more in the residential space yet than we have found it in commercial or industrial spaces, but if you give them the ability to become attributable, so you link this information to, for instance, their Facebook accounts and allow them the option of saying on Facebook, I did these things and saved this amount of money, and seeing what their friends on Facebook might be doing, the opt-in rate on that is significantly higher than any utility ever expected. Right? It's in the 20 to 30% of the population opt in and shares this stuff publicly and openly. And if you sort of think about that, it makes sense, right? I mean, I think I'm already a little bit past that generation, but my teenage kids tweet about everything. It drives me absolutely bonkers. And so there are people out there that, let alone credit card or cell phone receipts, are actually putting out what they're doing literally on a 15-minute basis or more frequently every single moment of their lives.
Well, and despite the fact that we do live in a full disclosure society in many respects, on the government side, it is still, it's still a charge, and it's still a state regulatory concern, and it's still a federal concern. And so we have stood up privacy initiatives. Last year, the White House came out with a Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights that's being applied aggressively in the internet and mobile worlds as it is in energy. So in that case, there are multiple initiatives underway. Lots of the states that have gone through advanced metering exercises have also gone through privacy exercises to ensure that the protections are in place for those who choose to be protected. And the biggest battle is generally let people who choose to overshare, well, bless their hearts, let them overshare as well. And that's the balance that we need to strike. However, we have, the Department of Energy has been leading out of the Smart Grid, the Federal Smart Grid Task Force, an exercise on a voluntary code of conduct that puts a little bit of an attempt at national uniformity on the principles of privacy. And we had a public meeting about that just a month ago here in Washington, D.C. So the states are moving forward on that, but to ensure that with advanced functionality comes lockstep with increases in assurances of privacy.
Right. Exactly right.
Very good. Let's come over here. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. My name is Jessica Lyman. I'm actually an ICF employee, so I'm cheating. So my question was about data continuity. So I understand the Green Button platform is based on a standardized utility data set. But as you look toward granularity at the C3 gentleman's level, are you seeing standardized data platforms for all of that information, or are you seeing kind of region-specific, utility-specific data sets?
Oh my gosh. Great question.
It's all the same, right?
Yeah, not a single byte is the same. No, actually, that's one of the, it kind of blends a number of topics we've talked about. So number one, no, there is little to no information standards. I mean, Green Button and the OpenADE, the standard that underlies it, is a great example of the government and industry working together to begin to set such standards. But for the most part, I would say that less than 2 to 3% of the data that we encounter is standardized. So one of the things that we learned to build was a canonical form of information for all of those analytics that I showed you, and a rapid way of being able to transform the data that we find in the shape and form that we find it into that basically standard form, so that we can then deal with it rationally.
And I'll add one thing, is that there's a gentleman named Chris King, now of Siemens, formerly of eMeter, but eMeter is one of the meter data management service providers to the industry. And he made an observation to some regulators just a little bit ago, is that eMeter has to maintain about 100 different information interfaces to ensure that their product remains synchronized with all of the utility systems it has to talk to. And he believes that through standardization, of course he mentioned Green Button, so I like that, is that he believes that they could shrink the number of interfaces that they have to maintain a living connection to by a factor of 50%. He thinks that he could really shrink that down. So it has benefits into the consumer, but really the utility enterprise itself can save a lot of money by making those standards more and more adopted.
Great. We'll have time for a couple more questions. Any over on this side of the room? You're good. All right. Let's go with the gentleman here.
So obviously we've been talking.
Could you introduce yourself?
Rashik Raman, I'm from Virginia Tech. So we've also obviously been talking about sort of the U.S. context and information there. Are there lessons that can be learned, particularly going on the gentleman's question, in developing markets where, for example, in India, there's huge power outages? Can information maybe at a lower cost be used there to increase, or grid reliability technology to be used there to make new efforts?
Care to start?
Sure. So that's a great question. And in some examples, I'll say yes. So using the India example, for instance, that country has now moved almost predominantly to cellular telecommunications because they simply did not have enough of the existing infrastructure in terms of landlines, nor was it in a shape of reliability that could be utilized. So what we're seeing in some of these evolving countries or developing countries is that they're actually leapfrogging technologies, and they are the ones that are adopting distributed energy resources and microgridding first, because in fact it's the way to be able to serve and create the type of reliability and resilience necessary, because you can't build that kind of machine in place in anything close to what we need it to be, right?
Oh, geez, there. So I'll chime in. So in the government to government, so the smart grid and grid modernization is happening on a global basis. There is a government to government relationship through ISGAN, yet another wonderful acronym. It's the International Smart Grid Action Network. But essentially it is an information sharing platform on lessons learned, and there are probably about 30 countries that are participating in information exchange and lessons learned and things like that. But also even, I know that the State Department has brokered an engagement with 20 utilities in India that put them through a smart grid road mapping exercise. Is that, do your modernization relative to the needs of your population. You need to find a roadmap to do that. And so they actually went through a tool that DOE and Carnegie Mellon created that allowed them to set a vision for how they want energy to improve in India, and then they can start to take as incremental steps along those paths.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, we're amazed how much incoming demand there is from all over the world, and in particular from developing countries. I think the conversation, it's always surprised me, the conversation, with the development country utility goes like, show me all your cutting edge best stuff, because that's what we want. All of it. And I'm like, really? Are you sure? Okay. So, so I do think what Eva said really resonates with me, which is I think they're definitely a few years behind, but there are, I think the countries that will move forward are really going to take a big jump forward when they do.
I'm going to use the moderator's prerogative to ask sort of a last question here. Chris, you talked about the DOE wanting to spend money that would be a catalyst for developments and for propagating these investments, the $9 billion trying to become hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion, we heard. Can you talk about some of the efforts to try to get that to happen? And I'm thinking particularly about sort of the state level outreach and the issues of trying, because it's the regulators in the states that generally need to approve these investments and the cost associated with them. And then if our other speakers could also address what you see, some of the next steps and challenges that you see in propagating these technologies.
Thanks. And I think that we need to, obviously we're generating a tremendous amount of information, and some of our highest value targets are in the regulatory community. We need to provide them information, but we also need to provide them with decision-making tools as well, of ways of evaluating what other organizations are doing, what other states are doing. But on top of that is that regulators are being presented with an increasingly complex technological set of choices, and they're not funded at near the rate that the utilities are to actually have the ability to analyze a very technological system deployment. And so, one of the interesting ones is the fact is that we developed a distribution grid simulation tool that a couple of private entities are turning into an objective regulatory analysis platform where the utility proposes their projects along with a simulation of what the technology can do. That gets put onto an objective platform. So it's not like the regulator has to hire a consultant to do it from the ground up.
Darn.
They still can, though.
Just kidding.
No, but no, it's there's plenty of room for analysis on that. However, if you have a business, so they evaluate the business case and they have the business acumen to do that. Now we're looking to build a technological platform where both sides can meet on a shared ground, run the simulations, and the regulators can not just ask business questions, they can ask technological questions. What do we get for the reliability and things like that? And then the final thing I'll throw in is the fact is that regulators need tools that show the economic impact that we're delivering. And we have some work underway that we hope to be talking about on the national benefit of investing in a smarter grid from an operational standpoint as well as the prudence of such an investment.
Sure. So federal policy and stimulus are very, very interesting things. And they can have tremendous impact on catalyzing investments in this space. But there are also limitations to it. I think perhaps one of the best examples of federal money spent in this country is the interstate highway system, right? In fact, I think I saw a speaker recently speak about that for every dollar invested by the federal government in the interstate highway system, $6 has been returned in economic advantage and benefit in the U.S. And that's spectacular. And you could imagine that if you sort of just did a simple overlay into the modern world and said that smart grid is the equivalent of why we built the interstate system, then we would get that kind of benefit. I mean, to Ogie's point of just information to consumers is giving a 3-to-1 benefit. If you now propagate that value up the grid, I think we would even be able to provide better than a $6 return on every dollar invested. However, unlike the federal government that had oversight on interstates, state-to-state connectivity, the federal government only has oversight on the transmission, where the transmission systems broach multiple states, and doesn't have oversight into actually what's happening at a state level. So in this case, and I've been in this industry most of my life, I actually believe that, no disrespect intended, policy is the more powerful weapon than stimulus. Because it's only policy, and it's harder, which is why we tend to resort to stimulus, because stimulus is faster and we get results quicker. But policy is the weapon by which we actually catalyze real change in this country, because unfortunately we have to do it 52 different times in each of the different states.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with that. I think the key, just very specifically, obviously the regulators in specific states play a huge role in facilitating a lot of the things we talked about today. The key dynamics is allowing the utility, decoupling the revenue they can collect from the actual usage. I think this to somebody's question here, why do you, regulators can make that a lot easier for the utility by putting in decoupling. So that's one. And in states where there is decoupling, you see so much of the products we talked about take hold at a much larger scale than in states that do not have decoupling. And then the second dynamic, which is related, is energy management services is really the next frontier for the utility. It's not just delivering electrons through the wires, but distributed generation is taking hold, these sort of the devices inside the homes. And the utilities must be allowed to make money from that and thrive in that environment. And the regulation has to be flexible enough to allow for that. And I believe if that happens, and it should, because regulators eventually do what makes a lot of sense of what's in the interest of for the utility and for the utility to thrive. I think once that happens, a lot of these energy management services, distributed generation stuff is really going to go up.
Please join me in thanking our speakers for a fantastic set of presentations here this morning. And thank you for coming. Hope to see you next month at our regular location to hear the Commissioner from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Thanks.